Good evening and welcome to our reflections from St Andrews on Thursday, the 9th of July. I want to think about fellowship this evening, taking another one of the holy habits from Andrew Roberts' book, beginning again with Acts chapter 2, verse 42. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, which we looked at yesterday, and then the sentence finishes, and fellowship. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship. In Acts chapter 2, the followers of Jesus focused their life around eating and praying and sharing their possessions, their goods together, so that people don't go without. They share each according to their need. And as we reflect this evening, maybe you can think of times when others have shared to you and it's helped you along through a difficult period of your life, or just through their simple sharing has been something that has moved you or moved you on in terms of your spiritual life. Real fellowship is the opposite to selfishness. Think on that for a moment. Real fellowship is the opposite to selfishness. It's about generosity. It's about living in community where that community is a place of belonging and a place of service. And by service, I mean serving one another, sharing with one another, supporting one another. A community which nurtures and sustains each other, which cares for one another and encourages one another. And in terms of being a Christian community, it is a place where we share the gospel, where we share the good news of Jesus Christ, where we share what we believe, and where that sharing is grounded in being genuine and authentic. True fellowship is not like that phrase which really annoys me when I'm either served in a shop or something. And this is going to sound horribly snobby, but when somebody says, "All right, mate," sorry, I come from Essex, but that's the way it would have been. When people call you mate as just a general passing phrase, mate implies for me something that involves deep friendship. So to use that in a throwaway greeting for somebody you don't know or somebody you've just nodded at in the street is both bizarre and in some ways I think quite abusive. But that's enough for me being a grumpy old man. True fellowship is not that shallow kind of community. And if we're going to get involved in genuine community, yes, it can involve all sorts of technology and communication through emails or Skype or even social media to a certain extent. But we have to avoid falling into the trap. While we might enjoy using some of those tools, some of them we have to recognize only operate at a very shallow level indeed. And being fair, some of those are not really very genuine. We can hide our true selves sometimes in those forms of communication. Britain, according to an old article in The Independent, was at one stage the loneliest country in Europe. And I'm not just talking about post-Brexit, where nobody likes us anyway, or anything to do with Eurovision Song Contest, where nobody likes us anyway. I'm talking in terms of the people who live here. It was recognised in a survey by The Independent that we are one of the loneliest countries in Europe. And loneliness was something that we flagged up at St Andrews when we did a kind of community audit about a year and a half ago. It's one of the key things that we wanted to combat, if you like. And maybe you can think of times when you've seen evidence of loneliness, either in our community where we are here or at other points in your life. I remember when I was a student on a placement in Old Trafford, and I used to go visiting with some wonderful Christians on an estate which was made up of 7 tower blocks, and they were called the Seven Sisters. And yes, it was a deprived area, and yes, there was lots of crime and stuff there, but what saddened me was that with these huge tower blocks, and you'll know the kind of thing if you've been to a similar place, is that it would be a huge challenge to really create a sense of some community, because the people's front doors didn't really connect with one another. There weren't the communal spaces where people would see each other across a street. Yes, they had windows pointing outwards from their flats, but it was a struggle in many ways to create community, like you might do in old streets where people saw one another or could see one another through their windows, play in the street together. There wasn't that similar sense, and it did make me feel sad when I used to go in there and work there. Loneliness in various shapes and forms is everywhere. In these coronavirus times at St Andrews, we've tried various ways to support one another when we can't be in face-to-face contact. We have our chat wheel where we encourage. We have some wonderful people who've volunteered to support one another through simply phoning and chatting on the phone, not about anything in particular, but just keeping in contact with one another. We encourage people to do that anyway. Our elders have hopefully been keeping in contact with all those on their pastoral lists. We've been encouraging one another to keep in touch with friends in and around our community. And of course, just yesterday morning, we had a socially distanced gathering of groups of 6 people, 4 groups in the grounds of St Andrews, which was well organised, and thank you to David and Hilary for that. But it was wonderful to see people actually meeting face to face. And although I've seen many of these people on a screen through Zoom on Sunday mornings, it was heartwarming to see people face to face again. We all need at some level, and this is the bottom line, we all need at some level, no matter what kind of personality we are, we all need real relationships. And that's what makes real community. But real community, for us as Christians, is formed by centering our community on Jesus, not trying to create community. That is a trap that is something we must be careful not to fall into. We mustn't try and create community. But it is something that is, it's a byproduct, if you like. Genuine community is a byproduct for us as Christians of living the way Jesus encourages us to live. Andy Freeman and Pete Greig, in a book called Punk Monk, commented on this, and they want to begin their quote with another quote from Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who said that he who loves community destroys community. And they went on to say, following on from that, if community itself becomes our aim, we risk becoming elitist, considering that we somehow are more learned or authentic than others. If pursuing community becomes our aim, we lose the sense of welcome, lest the stranger unsettle our balance. Community does become elitist if you try to create it. Let it grow out of your fellowship. Let it grow out of your faith-based relationships. That's how church community grows. As I may have said before, Andrew Roberts, who writes the book Holy Habits, grew up in one of the churches I ministered to, Methodist Church in Stafford. And it's heartwarming for me to find at various points there are people I recognise in his book. I want to read to you a little experience that he shared as a young person growing up in Berkswich Methodist Church. He says, I was blessed as a young person to grow up in a church community that valued younger people. Amongst many in the church who cared for us, loved us and put up with us in our formative years were Alan and Rose. Their commitment was astonishing. Every Sunday evening they opened their home to us, and when numbers grew so much that we couldn't fit in, they extended their home. We were welcomed, we were loved, we were listened to. We were served cakes that would put Mary Berry to shame. Rose was the most wonderful cook. We had our hearts repaired when teenage love fell apart, and we were encouraged in our discipleship, taken to evangelistic events where the call of Jesus was clearly presented, encouraged to join in with all sorts of acts of service in the community, and given opportunities to explore particular calls and forms of ministry. Well, of course, Andrew went on to become a Methodist minister, and we give thanks for that. But we give thanks for the Alan and Roses of this world. I remember Alan and Rose. Rose, by the time I knew her, sadly, had dementia, but Alan was one of the most wonderfully generous people that I've ever met. He was also very much a doer and wanted to get things done and moving. He was a great mover and shaker, but also through simple generosity and genuine fellowship helped really form community. We need the Allens and Roses of this world. I remember in my own life being particularly thankful for Patrick and Alison, who hosted our youth group when I was a young person. And they put up with a lot from us, if I'm honest. We probably trashed their home on numerous occasions. But the teaching that I received in their home by simply being welcomed made my life richer. And we grew a fellowship there, and although we may have moved away to different places, it was highly influential on who we became. So genuine fellowship is both relational and intentional. It's committed, creative, open, generous, and supportive. Let me read to you an excerpt from the book of Romans, chapter 12, beginning at verse 9, because it picks up on these themes that reflect true fellowship. Let love be genuine. Hate what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with mutual affection. Outdo one another in showing honour. Do not lag in zeal. One of my favourite words. Do not lag in zeal. Be ardent in spirit. Love the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in suffering. Persevere in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints. Extend hospitality to strangers. And those wonderful verses from Romans, and you can go on to read further in that chapter, and it reflects really what true fellowship, what true Christian fellowship for us ought to be. Committed, creative, open, generous, and supportive. Let us pray. We saw a stranger yesterday. We put food in the eating place, drink in the drinking place, music in the listening place. And in the sacred name of the triune God, he blessed us and our house, our cattle and our dear ones. As the lark says in her song, often, often, often goes the Christ in the stranger's guise. Amen. That was an ancient prayer, which is an ancient Celtic rune of hospitality that appears in the Iona Abbey service book. Let me just close with a blessing from that same book. As we share this place and time, may our life in community reflect the dance of the Trinity, by which the world is blessed. And the blessing of God, our Maker, Befriender, and Inspirer, be with us all this day, this night, and forever. Amen.